I'm Sarah Brumfield. This has been Brumfield we're with From the Page, and we do this series of kind of AI for archives webinars because we're curious about thinking about how AI can be applied to archives and special collections. And we know you are too, right? That's something we're all really curious about. I was in November at the AI for LAM conference in Vancouver, and Jessica and Jeremiah did a different version of this talk there. And I'm like, yes, more people would like to hear about this. I thought it was really interesting and very accessible. A lot of AI projects are big and expensive and hard, and we don't always have those resources. So we're always looking for ways to help y'all apply technology to special collections and archives. And I think this is right up that alley. So we're I'm gonna introduce Jessica and Jeremiah, and then we'll let them get started. From the Page does have a series of webinars. We try to do one or two every month. So our colleague Anna is going to paste that information into the chat for us, just so you know what else we have coming up in the next couple of months. So Jessica Robertson is the Digital Initiatives Librarian at the University of Alabama Libraries. And Jeremiah Colonna-Romano is the Digitization Manager at the University of Alabama Libraries. So Jessica and Jeremiah are going to speak for us today, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah, for the introductions. Great to meet everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to talk to you all about this project we've been working on. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for the slides. Let's see. Okay. So can everyone see this? Okay. Okay, so yes, as Sarah mentioned, Jeremiah and I have been working on a project to kind of feasibly incorporate AI technologies into our workflows for generating metadata for archival and special collections materials. To give you some kind of background about why we thought this project would be a good decision and might be, the collection that we had thought about doing this with, why that would be amenable to this kind of like automated AI-based workflow. So first and foremost, we had an organizational restructuring recently that kind of left us with a little bit less descriptive labor than we would have liked to have. So we had a new faculty position open up called Archival Metadata Librarian, and that person is located off-site. So that kind of introduced some challenges in trying to like transfer and track collections materials for processing and metadata between, the processing department and the digitization department. Our methods for kind of digitizing and managing files at scale depends on a very like highly structured local identifier schema. So we have these identifiers that incorporate things like the holdings area, the format, the unique collection identifier, the item level identifier, and then sub pages. And so that allows us to kind of folder things very consistently and use several scripts to kind of focus on batch uploading content so that we can scale up digitization. Furthermore, we use Content DM to host our digital collections management system. So we have a standard metadata template that has 12 fields. So that is consistent across all collections. So that was something that, we thought might be helpful for using the AI technologies. Finally, the collection that we were focused on, we have quite a few huge congressional collections just from being, the state repository. So the congressional collection was mostly set in somewhat contemporary type. The materials were from like the 80s and the 90s. So we felt somewhat, confident in the OCR output that we would get from these collections as compared to like some of the more rare, unique, less homogeneous materials and handwriting and things like that. So we were able to kind of, to give you, I realize I forgot the overarching workflow here. So we ran OCR on the materials after they had been foldered, and then used, and Jeremiah will get into this in more detail, used the ChatGPT API to generate baseline descriptive metadata according to our content DM template from the OCR files directly. And that is kind of the background for what inspired this project.
Okay, so I'll do a brief workflow overview and quickly reiterate some of the things that Jessica said. So the overarching idea was that we, had these modern, readily OCRable with, dirty OCR, typewritten documents from congressional collections and other ones like that, that we are able to get a bunch of dirty OCR information out of as just a matter of the digitization process. And I would assume that a lot of people have collections where, just as a matter of course, you're creating this OCR, which is nice, and you can use it for searching and put it in, invisible transcription fields and whatnot so that people can, find this stuff. But the idea was, well, we've got this sort of dimension of information, and what kind of things can we do with this transformer, that OpenAI came out with, last year. And so I was just sort of in a position to kind of jump on this idea and see what I could do with it. So like Jessica mentioned, we have a very structured digitization pipeline and a very structured naming process. So, you can see the example here of that file name. And while the file name itself doesn't tell you anything about it, that's not what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to tell you where it lives in the overall structure of our archive, and the position of the file tells you what it means. The thing that this does for us is it gives us uniqueness, explicit location within a directory structure, and then that helps us to do all of our automation for all of the rest of the things that we want to do by processing, content with scripts in batches, and, removing all of that, the labor that's involved with, dealing with lots of files and all the things that have to happen. So again, we've got these text files that get made OCR. It then gets handed off to ChatGPT. It does a couple of processes. One is we use the transformer to generate just fielded metadata, the kinds of things that you would put in a title, or determining the author, finding a date, making a subject heading. Those are the kinds of questions that we're asking the model to determine for us, so that we can make a hopefully decent descriptive understanding, and then field those things into pieces of information that we can then use for delivery, but also use for determining maybe what this thing is. And then the other thing that the script does is it also then will take some of those determined descriptive pieces of information, and it will use them to do some clustering analysis that will allow us to create some structure as far as series type information, so that we can create roadmaps to what it is that a collection that maybe no one has really looked at yet can give them a view into what all could be in here. So I'll go to the next one. A little bit more technical overview. So the piece of software is written in Python, and it uses a variety of libraries that are pretty common things. The scikit-learn is a great tool for doing all kinds of data analysis, and in this case, the clustering component of the script relies on tools there. The NumPy library does a lot of things and is super helpful for basically everything. OpenAI's API, which allows us to get access to ChatGPT, and there's some cost involved with using that API, and it is based on tokens, and the tick token is the next library on the list here. And that's a tool that actually does a very good job at approximating the number of tokens, which is the semantic unit and also the billing unit that OpenAI uses in order to determine what pieces of the text it's going to split it up into so it can chew it up. And then depending on how many of those pieces you create, it keeps track of those, and that's how much it bills you for. And then I always like to add some tinker into what I make because it's just easier to click on stuff rather than always typing on the command line. Okay, I'll go to the next one. So getting into some of the settings and kind of what this software does. So within the process of determining what, like how you want the model to interact with the material, there's a, in the chat completion API call, there's a couple of things. One of them is temperature. This is sort of the determination that you're asking the model to make and how much chaos you're willing to accept as part of its determination. So the more, you know, the hotter it is, you're allowing it to be more interpretive, and the colder it is, you're saying, let's be more conservative about how much of a leap you're going to take in order to determine this. And that is kind of a, you know, that is kind of an art to get to, you know, it to understand what it is you're trying to ask for and what it is you're willing to accept. Sometimes you want like really specific things. Other times you're hoping that it might make a leap to actually connect some dots. And so that is something that I have as a setting because you kind of do need to tweak it sometimes in order to get good results. Within the series creation component, you can give it a number of groups or clusters that you're assuming that the collection will probably consist of. And this is just sort of the base number of groups that you're looking to say, all right, I think maybe this collection probably has 10 meaningful groups, or maybe it only has 3 meaningful groups. So that's how that is set. There's several different models currently that OpenAI has for access through the API. And so there's just a portion in the script that allows you to select the model and use that particular one. I think there's a GPT-4 0.125 turbo and then a 3.5 turbo preview. No, that's all. And the thing is, it changes all the time. So keeping an eye on which models are available, which are the ones that are priced in the place you want them to be priced at, and the kinds of capabilities that they have for like token thresholds, which is the next thing. So as they keep revamping these models, they keep increasing, thankfully, the amount of tokens that you can hand to the model at any given time, and the amount of things it can hold sort of in its thinking context when you're asking it your questions. What the script does is it says, okay, so let's say you've got a ledger and it has 200 pages in it. That's going to be a huge number of tokens that you would never want to pay for. Well, it turns out that most items, the first couple of pages tell you a lot of what you need to know in order to determine what it is that the item is. It's going to have a title page, it's going to have an index, it's going to have, author or whatnot. So a couple of thousand tokens is generally pretty much enough context. But changing the size of the token threshold also affects how much money it's going to cost for you to run a batch, because you're saying, all right, I want, because if you're running a bunch of books and you're saying I want 10,000 token context for every item, then you're going to get 10,000 tokens for every one of those items. You're going to be paying for 10,000 tokens for every one of those items. So depending on what the budget is and how much information you want to collect, working with how many tokens you're handing it can determine the quality, but also it might not actually affect it that much. So a number of tokens might work. And then there is a portion at the front. So the script is built modularly. So there is an array in the script that allows you to set the fields that you want to pull data from. push data to, and then the question you want to ask in order to populate that field with that data. So in our workflow, it's like Jessica was saying, we have a fielded metadata that we use for delivery. It's got 12 basic archival things we want to know: title, author, date, number of pages, abstract, collection name, item, these things. So the way that the script is set up is that depending on what kind of data you want to collect for your project or archive, you can go in and say, all right, these are the fields that I use, and then I can write prompt questions into that library array that allows you to then prompt the chat completion with a particular question and then pipe that information back into the field, and then it will generate the spreadsheet with the fields that you use and populate it with, by using the questions that you wanted to ask. Okay, let's go to this. Okay, so a little bit more about how the batch running works. So the whole process starts with digitization. So the idea is that we've got collections in the stacks. Perhaps they're not well structured, or they are too large, or not high enough priority, or a bunch of things that would not put them at the top of the queue for being digitized and made available for folks. So one of the ideas that brought this project to the front was, okay, so can we make a tool that allows us to create more access to things that we would never prioritize for access? That would be a good thing to be able to do. So this particular process starts with digitalization. So we've got to have images of the assets, all the pages, and then create the OCR from that. And one of the things that this software relies on is the human person doing the digitizing determines the itemhood of the thing, because really there's automated ways that you can attempt to determine itemhood, but if the whole entire process sort of hinges off whether or not you're identifying itemness of the thing, also then making it so that's what gets described and that's what gets turned into series, then you really need a person being able to say, okay, I can with surety say, yes, this is the first page and this is the last page and that's the first item and then these are the next thing. Otherwise, in a page stream, things can get real mushy, and especially within the context of very non-standard items in our special collections, this thing, that's an important first step. So
not to interrupt, just to add something really quickly. This particular collection, the finding aid was based entirely on an inventory provided by the donor, which in many ways is a good thing because we had that donor input. And however, it wasn't correspondingly rehoused. So the finding aid description did not necessarily correlate with the physical reality in the boxes. So that was kind of another factor that let us be like, okay, well, we have to kind of digitize and process concurrently almost in like creating that digital order on a box that really was just, a bunch of documents like stacked on top of each other. But yeah. Sorry, Jeremiah, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. Okay, so right. So once digitization happens, then we've got asset files for all of the items named uniquely in the hierarchy where we expect them to be. OCR is made, and then that allows us to then start handing the OCR in an appropriate chunk of tokens to the model. After we set all the parameters and tell it what we want it to do and select the model and give it a token threshold, then it will go and process these things, and it will create fielded metadata for the fields we're asking it questions about to fill, like, for instance, title. And then it will go and it will create additionally another run with embeddings, and I'll get to that in a minute, and we'll add that also into the collection descriptive metadata, and then it will give you a a log of all the things it did, the questions that it actually sent, the responses that it got back. So you can, if something weird's happening, you can go back and be like, oh, wow, it really did this crazy thing here. And when it asked it this, then it wanted to do this. And it actually shows you what got sent. So you can do some verification afterwards if necessary. Okay, go to the next one. Okay, so so apart from just asking the chat completion to assess the dirty OCR text from an item, once we get back and create this spreadsheet that has all of the fielded information, the next thing that I'm doing is taking the text from that we use to ask the model to make the descriptive information, and then I'm handing that OCR text back to a different model that will create a text embedding from that text. Now, because, and the reason why that it does actually have some good results is that the chat completion and the embedding creation models are generated from the same data and use the same vector space. So when we create a text embedding from this text, and we also use the same text to make descriptive metadata, they're actually coming from the same data space. What that allows us to do is then use other kinds of data analysis tools, in this case, a k-means assessment, to find clusters of items, because I'm making embeddings at the item level. So like a letter or a book will then have an embedding and fit within the space. And then I'm saying, okay, now show me all of the items that all fall semantically next to each other based on all of the things that the model thinks this thing is about. And then from there, I can then, with that grouping from the k-means assessment, I can then take the descriptive metadata that I made prior and say, all right, I didn't know all these things were necessarily related, but now there is a vector space relationship between all these items. Now I'm going to hand the chat completion, like I think in this case, the title and the abstract. I'm going to hand it the title and the abstract for all of those things that it has said these are like, and I'm going to say, give me one series heading for what all these things might be like. And in that way, create a structural grouping for things within the collection that you may not have, thought were there. And this is sort of as a tool to help people, like a roadmap into a collection that you may not necessarily know what is there or where is what, or you didn't realize that this thing in this box also had a lot of similarity to a bunch of stuff in this box, as a way of creating access through thinking about what things are like other things, and allowing that as a venue for researchers to be able to get some access to otherwise perhaps unstructured content in a digital collection. Okay.
Okay, so from an output standpoint, making sense of the results of the script. So it's very good, going back to like the structure of the files and the foldering structure and everything, it's very, very good at mapping that identifier to the correct item. We'll say that. The output is certainly not, just ready to be uploaded, which is what we expected. And, when we had conversations about all the different parts of the process, for example, like limiting the number of tokens to, for example, correspond to like the first couple of pages of an item. Like one of the discussions we had is like, well, a human cataloger isn't reading entire books to come up with a call number. So it's something that's very comparable. Hallucinations, of course, are a thing that we all know about with AI. That can get, one thing we have noticed is that the model really, really wants to provide an answer for everything. So making sense of what it thinks it is when it is, you know, motivated to provide an answer, can introduce like a level of complexity because, you know, ultimately when you have an output, when you are finding things that are incorrect in stuff that already exists versus, you know, just writing the title or the metadata from scratch. So like that's kind of a consideration that has been introduced with this problem. Problematic formats, you know, there's a lot of clipping files in this collection, and it's hard to steer the model to, because it's collecting all the text in a clip, including the actual article and also all the articles around it. So a way to kind of like target the OCR, I don't know, is maybe a avenue for further inquiry. Length, it really, the subject, I mean, it was spitting out probably like 15 to 20 subjects most of the time. But we have learned, you know, the part of the script that essentially creates a data dictionary to kind of establish the fields and the prompts. That is certainly like a tool that we can use to kind of refine what we're actually asking it, or maybe put those limits of like, don't give us more than 5 subject headings or something like that. So in summary, you know, it's pretty successful at recognizing formats of things. Formats are going to be super useful for, you know, Jeremiah's exploration into the establishing a digital series plan, just because, you know, at least for our finding aids, a lot of these series are format driven. So those two things really coincide nicely. Controlled vocabularies, you know, once we started refining the prompt fields to tell it to only, you know, pull authorized headings versus references, that was a pretty successful kind of like tweak that allowed the subjects to be a little bit more normalized. Like I said, even just having a spreadsheet with like a baseline title and a local identifier field filled out, like, is a huge help just for getting started with metadata. You know, that I think this collection, it was probably like 5,000 to 6,000 files or something. So like having them foldered and having it correspond to the metadata field that says local identifier, like that's really like introduces a lot of efficiencies in the general like digitization workflow. Stuff that we, you know, are still kind of talking about working through is this difference between like the mathematical approach to resource description and groupings rather than, you know, the semantic approach of like, well, if we're grouping things by like, how does this affect, you know, our understanding as archivists about finding aid and finding aid structures and arrangement as being reflective of things like original order or, you know, the context and circumstances of how an item was created. So that kind of contradiction, I guess. Sense making, you know, it's trained on North American centric materials. So just keeping that in mind as we're, you know, going through the output and trying to kind of edit the description to, you know, reflect the actual materials and kind of connect users with materials that might be relevant to their research project. Like I said earlier, yeah, believable responses that are ultimately correct. Like that takes a lot of concentration to just be like, okay, this, given that the other items in this folder are dated this, the model thinks that this item is also dated that, but that is not actually present on the item. But if you were a human cataloger, like what level of like plausibility would you use to make that decision? So like those kinds of questions are always kind of fun. And then, yeah, reparative description, you know, we, in this field, we talk a lot about like our systems being able to handle marginalized identities, for example. So thinking about like alternative controlled vocabularies outside of like Library Congress subject headings, things like that. That's not something that we've, you know, like quite figured out in using this system. So those are the kind of main output considerations that we've uncovered. And then, oh yeah, so then, yeah, further inquiry, Jeremiah mentioned, you know, trying to digitally create a series. we did a little bit of experimenting with describing photographs, thinking about, like, for example, providing like different modes of engagement in the reading room. Like if we were able to like have a description of an image for students. Jeremiah, I'll let you talk more about that because this was your experience.
Yeah. I mean, this image of this piece of sheet music is sort of my go-to example of this, where, you know, in the past, you've got really access to, you know, standard font, printed font, OCR detection for this, for being able to, you know, make an automated transcript of a document. But the GPT-4 vision model, you know, is trained on all manners of handwriting and decorative, you know, writing, and is able to detect a lot of letters in weird contexts. And you can see there's a whole bunch of text that's very, you know, flowery and integrated within the graphic design of this image, but it's still able to go in and identify that stuff and pull it out and make a and you know and find it and understand what it is. So that does open up a level of access to handwriting as well that, you know, was not readily accessible. Granted, the tokenization of images is much more expensive than the tokenization of text. So it does ramp up the cost of the process, but depending on, you know, the size of your project, you know, that may not be really outside of the scope of consideration, because you know, the costs of the model keep dropping, and the size of the tokenized data that you can hand to it keep growing. So I'm kind of watching these two things come together and realizing, okay, this project I'm gonna be able to do that when we get here, and this project will be able to do that when it gets here. And so in my mind, kind of lining up things that, you know, that seem like access to processing those things will be, you know, budgetarily accessible, you know, in the not impossibly distant future.
Do you know off the top of your head, can you talk a little about the specific costs?
So they've changed the pricing model recently. So before, it used to be like you just had a credit card on file, and as you process tokens throughout the month, they kept track of it, and at the end of the month, they basically just billed your credit card. At this point, they're doing this thing where you've got to front the money into the account first. And so I believe at this point, I think the high end GPT 3.5 is 50 cents for 1 million tokens, which is really cheap. For the GPT-4, it's $30 for 1 million tokens. So it is like 60 times more expensive to use their highest end model. And then you pay for tokens you put in, and then you pay for tokens that you get out. But as far as the tokens that you get out, as far as this piece of software is concerned, it's minuscule. Basically, there's no cost to the tokens that you're receiving, because it's just like a title or a date. Whereas you might be handing, you know, 100,000 tokens to it to do the assessments for your batch. The tokens that you're getting back are in the, you know, 100, couple hundred. But yeah, like I said, it's the 3.5 model is really very cost effective. The GPT-4 model is it is better. Is it 60 times better? I don't know.
There's a couple of questions, Jeremiah, in the chat that kind of pertain to let them finish. Can we
Yes.
let them finish first? We'll let you finish first.
Well, I think
I
that's
think- Yeah, I think
the last
that's,
slide.
yep.
In conclusion, this has been, it's been an interesting kind of exploratory project that, you know, and it's inspired a lot of different conversations about, you know, like what's a responsible, ethical, efficient way to kind of engage with these tools. So
Yeah, but just how much more access they give you is amazing, right?
Yes. Yeah, from a year ago, it is like, I think the context was 1,000 tokens a year ago, and now it's 128,000. So it's significantly bigger.
Wow.
And also thinking about like this, we wouldn't be able to do this with the vast majority of our collections, just with like the OCR considerations for the handwritten material. So this collection was kind of a perfect example and test collection to try it out with.
Yeah, but you know, we've been working on the handwritten text recognition side with Transcribus and doing analysis and correction of that. And that's all really good and coming along better and better all the time too. So I think you can eventually, right? Yeah, it's very exciting.
Awesome.
So we do have some questions. I'm going to do the pricing questions first and then come back to Mark's question. So AHC ref, I forget who you, Heritage Center, something Heritage Center. What's your average monthly cost? What's the highest you paid for 1 month? Like when you were really processing this collection, how big did it get? How expensive did it get?
Well, I mean, so, you know, we're still working through this tool from a design and development. You know, we haven't got full buy-in yet, which hopefully we'll be able to do here. And transfer what we're doing up to some larger projects that are actually production level projects. But you know, it like boots on the ground kind of numbers are like, you know, let's say, I feel like a text-based collection that had like 120 items would cost like $2 to $3 to process, and would take like 15 minutes. So it's a very fast turnaround for, you know, metadata for you know, hundreds of items, and it's really in the couple of dollars range to do batches of that size.
I just wrote that in the chat because it's we all want to understand that a little bit better. Yes, there'll be a recording available later. We'll send it out to everyone who registered probably Monday.
So people have already started asking questions in the chat. Because we have so many people, we'd encourage you to type things out. So if there are more questions, please go ahead and ask. And Sarah and I definitely have some that we've been making notes as we've gone through. But let's take the question that Mark had here. Mark asks, do you envision your algorithm making a mid-process determination based on content and then flipping to GPT-4 or another more advanced model when necessary? That's a fascinating idea. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that there's I mean, so the thing that every time you ask a question, you have to hand it your context of data. So every time you refactor something because you want to ask another question of a response that came back, then you are doubling the cost for asking that question because you have to run it back through again. So it is a, you know, a process of perhaps how do you identify where the diminishing returns happens? Because there are you know, and there are these models now that are coming out that work like as a part of a network of agents, basically. So you've got, within the construct of your script, you've got some AI agents who are asking these questions and creating responses, and then those responses get handed to other agents that do analysis, and then hand those responses to other agents that do these things. And you can, create these loops where you're refining and asking questions about the content in order to get a better result. But once you start doing that cycle, then you're multiplying the amount of time and cost that it goes into making that result. Although that being said, I do think that, for instance, the layers where you're asking one thing to happen, like creating the descriptive fields, and then you want to do an assessment of the embeddings, it might actually, I could see that you would use a more sophisticated model to do the bigger, like handing all of the titles and abstracts to GPT-4 instead of GPT 3.5 to do a series assessment or other kind of top level determinations about what this thing is about, rather than just taking the more statistical frequency of what is this thing as compared to other things. I think that actually would probably be a good use of that kind of idea of this tiered hierarchy of asks to the different models.
So there's another question. After the spreadsheet is created, how much human processing is needed to move the items to the final form in which the metadata is needed?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of human intervention. With this collection, we did not go back and reprocess things, but we went back and adjusted the finding aid to better reflect the order that already existed in the box. So the main work is the metadata, and making sure that it's, it reflects the reality of what the items are saying. Yeah.
Human review. This is
Yeah.
something that the more we talk to people about AI generated text, whether it's handwritten text recognition or metadata, that's the piece that I think we all are looking for, and that we as kind of tool makers are looking for ways to make that easier too. So
Yeah.
So Emma Stanford asks, could you say a bit more about the item defining step in your workflow? Yeah, I wondered about that too. How do the itemization decisions made by people doing the digitization impact the describability and discoverability of the items in your experience?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
mhm.
Like I said, I think that it has ultimately allowed us to create more granular description, which is, always going to be nice for discovery. Having, getting a box of items that is, I mean, as we all do in processing, like when you process at the folder level, there's going to be things in the folder that maybe don't necessarily you would expect to find in the folder. So like being able to just go completely item level and say, okay, this report is in a folder with other reports, but this report in and of itself is what we are describing. So we're going to create in the digital space that concrete, like this is this subpage where this item starts, this subpage where this item ends, and let the model kind of use that text to describe the materials at a lower component than what we would do if we were reprocessing.
So if I can ask a follow-up question, so what I'm hearing is that the digitization was done at the folder level, and then you're working on creating metadata at the item level. Is that right?
It's the digitization was done at the item level. The processing was at the folder level. And it was very minimally processed. So we kind of, in order to make access a little bit more accurate and findable, we went lower and more granular.
Jeremiah, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a basic concern that the whole process relies on definitely saying these images come from this letter. So there could be ways to determine whether or not, like in a stream of pages, these pages are part of this letter. But if that breaks down at all, then as you keep moving through the process, then that smear starts to affect every other thing you're trying to determine. So just having a human say, yes, these first 5 pages are the letter 1, these next 6 pages are letter 2, and having a surety that that is correct, then allows the rest of the assumption-based processes to hang on a framework that you can trust actually is describing the items. So you're not adding that extra layer of, oh yeah, these things actually didn't line up correctly.
And that's it's a labor intensive step. Like it really is just kind of making sense of items in it. But ultimately, yeah, because if we didn't have that reliability that like a human used their judgment to create these items, like down the line, the problems would just be compounded.
Right. So there's another question. What's been your experience with prompt engineering? Any particular challenges or successes? Yeah, my plan is to go look at your GitHub repo or your GitLab
Yes.
repo and see what prompts you're using.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that's kind of weird, that I don't know how I feel about. Like, for instance, you know, potentially, like if you threaten the model with repercussions for not doing a good job, that it will be more complete. I don't really, I'm just not going to write that into my script. But so the kinds of things, it's like short, descriptive phrase components to a multi-piece prompt, I find is effective. So, anytime I find myself wanting to say and, I don't do that. It's like period and then your next statement. And then being very specific. I mean, so with this process, it's like I want a date created in the format that I want it, so that it is good to go and is standardized and uses the format that we need it to do. So, creating, for instance, like an example in generic terms. So like, for instance, in the script, it's like format date like YYY-MM-DD. If you give it like a specific example, it will be like, oh, that's what you want. And it will just give you your example every time. As like, oh, you've shown me what the completion should look like, so I'm going to hand you that thing. So generic pattern, it can make the leap from that specific example. It tends to think that that specific example is the solution to the question. And then the model really wants to talk to you. It wants to be narrative. It wants to be conversational, and you have to shut that down as much as you can with language, like only return this, return just the portion of this that matches this, add nothing in addition, don't narrate. Like words like that can cut down on having this other noisy text filling, and have all your fields show up as like, the title that I think would be best for this item would look something like this, and then it gives you the title, like, so that obviously you want to avoid.
I would
But yeah.
also add like very explicitly tying the prompts to the content. Be like, return date in XY format as found in input, like that kind of, so that it's still gonna guess and extrapolate, but maybe less so.
So another question, did you think of any privacy or copyright considerations when you were putting this content into ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So, I mean, you can only go by what they're saying they're doing, which is that they're not using the information that you hand it to do any training with. So, yeah,
Well-
I mean, it is a concern, and you know, that is probably a thing to think about when you're planning a project that uses this kind of tool. What kind of exposure is your project and group willing to take on as you know, as far as privacy is concerned? So yeah.
I will point out, I would really encourage everyone to go read OpenAI's usage and privacy statements, because here's where it gets interesting to me, is if you're using their API, they very explicitly say, we don't keep this, we're not using it, it's yours. There's nothing that they try to assert rights over when you're interacting with their application programming interfaces with scripts, like what Jeremiah is doing. If you are using Chat GPT, this interface that we have on the screen here, then the rules are different, right? And they're keeping more of that, and they're using that as input into what they're doing and how they're training their models and thinking about that. So it's very different. But if you think, from like, they want businesses to use this, and businesses do not want their data to be, stolen and incorporated into something that anyone else can use for completions. So I mean, I think the incentives are aligned if you're using the API to that. They're not really pulling that data and using it to do other things. Now, I will point out, you all probably run digital library systems of some sort or another, and that stuff is being crawled by people that are training large language models all the time. So yeah, I'm sorry, if you're just putting stuff in that you're using to describe and then put on the web, does it really matter? That's my attitude. So what else do we have? Any more questions?
Yes, we have, oh yeah, great one, Mara. Is there anywhere in the metadata where you acknowledge the role of AI in generating it?
Great question. We have not done that, but would be good to think about. And Jeremiah, you had the idea also, like thinking about in a collections as data kind of standpoint, like maybe at some point in the future, even like publishing the embeddings data as metadata that other people could use. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my future brain thinks that that as part of technical metadata and long-term storage and accessibility of the objects, that citing the model that you used and providing an embedding for at the item level for the things then adds a potentially huge level of data processing ability to your collection, and turns the descriptive component and gives it a data processing component that I think would be pretty great. But like I said, this works in the context because like I'm using both of these tools. They both come from the same model, and so they have a relationship in the same semantic space. But and that's great for a researcher trying to work with a particular collection that has been structured that way and provides that stuff. The cool sort of bigger long-term thing would be, oh, well, if lots of people use the same model, then all of a sudden those collections have cross-related semantic space, connections that you could do interesting things with.
And then eventually someone will figure out how to map one model's, vector and another one, so you can cross-talk across them, even if they've been analyzed with different models. That's really, really cool.
Yeah. So yeah, standardized format and form for relaying within technical metadata and descriptive metadata the presence of embeddings, I think, is something that I have not found out there, which I see as a place that the community needs to add some thought to. So
Helen Bear encourages y'all to write a paper about this for maybe Code for Lib. So that's
and that brings us to another question, or where else can we track this work or find out more about it?
I did put the GitLab link in the chat
Yeah,
for
but
anyone who
if
wants
you've written
that.
this up, is there a project blog or anything like that? Or is it just here?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I've got some instructions and some examples and the code in the GitLab. And
Great.
so yeah, feel free to go there and download it and give it a whirl. Yeah, and send me an email or Jessica an email with any questions.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. This was a super technical presentation. We had about 100 people sign into the webinar and over 90 of them stuck around for almost all of it, like
Right.
till the end of the actual presentation, which I think just goes to show how much interest there is and how much willingness people are to think really hard about this stuff, because it takes a lot of thinking. So thank you both, and thank you all for showing up and participating and asking questions.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic.
Okay. Thank you.